Hello, it's Shamrocker again. Welcome to the Proud Heretic channel, where we are deconstructing one domino at a time. Now, before we go any further, I will elicit the inevitable criticism of why I can claim that I'm a progressive Christian and yet I'm wearing a Proud Heretic t-shirt with an upside down cross. Okay, just a moment to explain. Number one, I'm only a heretic because evangelical Christianity has judged me as such. Okay? So I gladly embrace the epithet and reclaim it as a compliment. Okay? And then the second thing is the inverted cross does not mean I'm a Satan worshiper. Okay? I am a progressive Christian. What I'm simply doing here is I'm holding up a mirror. That's the point of this channel, is to be flipping tables and holding up mirrors to what you did. The inverted cross is what you have done to the Christian faith. You have turned it on its head as a dogmatic evangelical Christian. So here's your sign. And so today's topic is, does God fit the modern pro-life definitions? And this was a personal journey for me through some difficult biblical questions. By way of introduction, I grew up in church since I was 10 years old. I'm 57 now, so I spent 47 years as an evangelical Christian. I was worship leader for 5.5 years as of last December. Yeah, I came out of it just last year. And I've been in different kinds of churches and so forth. And like many evangelicals, I was always taught that Christianity, now not just evangelical Christianity specifically or uniquely, but Christianity overall, to be a Christian, meant you were part of a pro-life, quote unquote, pro-life religion. And that's what evangelical Christianity is, so much so that it has become a non-negotiable identity marker in order to be not only an evangelical Christian, but in their minds, in order to be a Christian. Okay. Evangelical Christianity is not just generally pro-life, but uniquely pro-life. Now, I was taught that God's concern for every human life, from conception to natural death, was one of the defining characteristics of the, again, quote unquote, biblical worldview, even though there is no such thing, but that's a topic for another time. But suffice it to say here, there is no such thing as a biblical worldview. That's a myth. And so being taught that God's concern was so minute for all of humanity, I believed that for 47 years. And then I started reading the Bible more carefully, not devotionally, not through a sermon series. I was just reading the Bible. That's really all you have to do if you're willing to let the text speak for itself in its own context. And so I began noticing something that nobody had really prepared me for. And I couldn't believe that I hadn't seen it this way before. But again, that's the power of the Kool-Aid. You see, that's the power of the mind control that comes over you, like the Vulcan mind meld, all that indoctrination. After so many years, that's just the way things are for you. There is nothing outside of the Truman Show. But I began noticing that the God described in many biblical passages didn't really seem to be in accord with what modern Christians call pro-life. The realization for me didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't because I wanted to reject Christianity, but rather it happened because I cared enough to ask the truth about uncomfortable questions. I want to walk through 4 passages and ideas that challenged me. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm simply asking whether or not our modern slogans actually fit the text. And so, number 1, Noah's flood, the destruction of nearly every human being. Well, Genesis 6 through 9 tells the story of Noah's flood. Now, we're not going to read it here. You can go and do your own homework and just read it for yourself. It's right there. The text has been there for thousands of years. It ain't going anywhere. It'll be there when you get there. According to the story, God destroys virtually every human being on earth. Now, not just criminals and not just violent adults. It was everyone. Men, women, children, teenagers, animals, pregnant women, and only 8 were assigned to survive. Now, let's just use a little critical thinking here and think about this carefully. If a modern government intentionally killed every child on earth except a handful, we would call that a crime of unimaginable proportions against humanity, would we not? Yet when God does it in Genesis, that very thing, many Christians, now not all, in all fairness, that's fine, but from where I came from as an evangelical, yes, we call it justice. Now, how is that? Now, I used to say as an evangelical that, well, they just deserved it because they pissed God off so much. As it says there, every thought of their hearts was only evil continually. And so good riddance. They deserved what they got. Now, what a compassionate attitude. But besides that, look, I'm not even making an argument here. I'm simply making an observation. See, whether you take Noah's flood literally or not is really irrelevant. The God of the flood story doesn't seem to really be acting in accordance with modern pro-life ethics, does he? See, if pro-life, as evangelical Christians define it, is preserving innocent human life whenever possible, then the flood narrative seems to create a serious tension. Number 2, the Canaanite conquest for genocide or total destruction. Well, the second challenge for me comes from the conquest narratives. Passages such as Deuteronomy 20 and 1 Samuel 15, and again, go do your own homework, look these up on your own time. They'll be there. They describe God commanding the destruction of entire populations, and we really don't know how many were destroyed. But again, this included men, women, children, infants, even animals. Were they born sinful? You see, the language here is difficult to ignore. And I know I've read books from multiple angles on this topic, and your apologetics, typically your evangelical apologetics, will come in and present divine command theory or, so on and so forth, and just try to gin up the least possibility. Well, it could have been this way. Well, never mind what the text says. Let's just believe what we want to, right? But if we're looking at the text, this is what we see. I mean, livestock wasn't spared, nothing. I mean, everything was destroyed according to the commandment. Now, see, again, we try to explain away these passages, but before we explain them away, shouldn't we at least acknowledge what the text actually says? See, the modern pro-life movement argues that human life is sacred and should never be intentionally destroyed, right? That's what I was taught. Yet here again, we have biblical passages portraying God as commanding exactly that. Why is that? See, that's your God of love. See, now, for years, I held that cognitive dissonance. Yes, I believe in a God of love, and yet I also believe in a God who would kill all of humanity because he got pissed off. Well, you just live with it, keep drinking the Kool-Aid. Well, no, I set the damn Kool-Aid cup down, and I'm not drinking it anymore. I'm looking at the text, and I'm using critical thought. That makes me a heretic. And so, again, I'm not telling you what conclusion to reach. I'm not even really necessarily making an argument. Again, I'm making observations. And I'm simply asking whether the slogan, God is pro-life, naturally emerges from these stories, or might it be just what we bring to the text as an already pre-existing identity marker that we want to read into the text and what we want the Bible to say? Is that a remote possibility for you? Number 3, The strange ritual in Numbers chapter 5. Now, one of the most surprising passages I encountered was Numbers 5, verses 11 through 31. Again, do your own homework. It's too long to read here. A husband suspects his wife of adultery in the passage. Now, there is no evidence and there's no witnesses, so a priest performs like this weird ritual involving holy water and a curse, okay? Now, translations here differ in all fairness, and I'm not promoting one view over the other. I'm simply, again, making observations about what scholars are saying, the world of scholarship, outside of the evangelical bubble. See, scholars debate exactly what is going on in that passage. Some interpret the results as infertility. And then other scholars argue that it may involve the termination of a pregnancy. Well, whatever conclusion you reach, one thing is clear, is that the passage is not remotely concerned with fetal rights in the way modern pro-life ideology or theology is. In fact, if the pregnancy interpretation is correct, then God is giving instructions, or seems to be, for a ritual that could terminate a pregnancy, a form of abortion, right? Now, that is the view of some scholars. But the fact is, it's debatable whether or not the Bible endorses a form of abortion. And that's what I want to point out here. It's actually debated among critical scholars, okay? So maybe we should heed some of that and maybe reassess. Just a thought. So, at the very least, this passage shows that the Bible's categories often differ markedly from modern political talking points. The Bible is an ancient text, and it does not always ask the same questions that we ask. Number 4, hell and the fate of humanity. Well, think about the implications here. The evangelical doctrine says, and as I was taught, is that the vast majority of humanity will go to hell, according to Matthew 7, verses 13 through 14. Straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be who find it. I always interpreted that and was taught that that meant that most of human beings are going to hell. Okay? Well, and this is your pro-life God. Keep in mind, the God of love. But we're talking about billions upon billions of people. Perhaps going all the way back to the Neanderthals, who knows? And we're talking about people past, present, and future. Endless torture, endless conscious punishment. That's depending on one's theology. Now, here's the salient question. Can a worldview accurately be described as pro-life if it ultimately concludes that the vast majority of humanity experiences eternal ruin at the judgment of God? Now, as I was taught, as a good Calvinist, is that God predetermines everything, the end from the beginning and all things in between. He has chosen his elect and he passed over, or if you believe in double predestination, as I did at one time, then he doubly elected the non-elect to go to hell. And so God planned it that way. God, this God of love, planned that most humans that he ever created would go to eternal misery. So again, I'm not arguing for or against hell here. I've got another video for that. But I'm simply pointing out a tension. And really, for me, it became an irresolvable tension. I decided to quit living with the cognitive dissonance, okay, and rethink and reassess some things. And the same Christians who so passionately defend the sanctity of human life, okay, often also affirm a theology in which most humans are eternally lost because that's how God wants it. Well, this is at least worth thinking about, isn't it? So, what I eventually realized, the deeper issue here isn't Noah or Canaan or Numbers 5 or even hell. Okay. The deeper issue is that many of us inherit conclusions before we duly examine the evidence. I know I did. And this is why I remained so ignorant for 47 years of all of this scholarship and of all of this data and of all of this science that has been out there for decades. In the case of scholarship, for hundreds of years. I was handed a prefabricated identity as a Christian, an entire package, an entire Truman Show. The movie's already set to go. You just play your role. Stay in that straight and narrow. See, Christian, biblical, pro-life, conservative, orthodox. You had to carry all that burden on your back, no matter what the science said, no matter what people say about how it traumatizes them and hurts them. We got to remain orthodox. Well, fuck orthodoxy. If that means that I have to harm my neighbor, okay? And if your theology harms your neighbor, then maybe you need to grow the hell up and reassess your theology. Just some friendly advice. And I accepted those labels, but long before I was honest enough to investigate whether the Bible actually supported them. And I finally concluded that it does not. So when I finally started asking the hard questions, some of those assumptions that I had before didn't survive. And good riddance. Thank God that they didn't. Thank God that I was able to grow the hell up. And other of my assumptions changed, and some disappeared completely. Not because I wanted them to, but because I couldn't honestly defend them anymore. And it really is just as simple as that. It's a matter of epistemic or intellectual integrity and honesty with yourself, with the text, and with others. Okay? So, in closing, now maybe you'll reach different conclusions than I did. And that's okay. I'm not here to try and deconvert anybody or destroy anybody's faith. Okay? Now, my goal here is simply to encourage intellectual or epistemic honesty and critical thinking. That's all. Now, if we're going to claim that a belief comes from the Bible, then we should be willing to test that claim against the Bible itself, shouldn't we? So maybe we should just pump the brakes a bit before making things into a dogma that actually ends up harming others and deprives our neighbors of their rights. Sometimes what we discover may be surprising, sometimes uncomfortable. In deconstruction, that's kind of the point, right? Is to start shedding all of that certainty, that dogmatic certainty that we were just so convinced of. And sometimes the hardest part of faith isn't doubting God. It's doubting the things that we were taught about God, the things that we were taught that perhaps misrepresented God, and perhaps sometimes in gross ways. So for me, that's where deconstruction and thus freedom began. And so that concludes this episode of Deconstruction Diaries. If you feel that this video has resonated with you in any way, feel free to like and subscribe below. And you can also check out my new album, Proud Heretic, just dropped last month. And you can also check out my merch line. You can see my direct app link below. It's all just right there. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Peace.